Pete grinned and responded, "Dad, it's Mom," as he took the phone away from his daughter. The fact that this was going to be his first conversation with his wife that morning made him eagerly anticipate it, despite the fact that he had a pretty good idea of what the topic of this conversation was going to be. He heard his wife, Joan, say, "Hey, baby, can my sweet teddy bear oversee a dozen teenagers today? I'd like to think I can handle this. Eva and the girls have been planning this for a couple of weeks, so all I have to do is follow their instructions. She and her friends are 19 or 20, so it isn't like I'm trying to shepherd a bunch of toddlers." She asked, "Did you get the pool all set up the way she wanted it?" He replied, Yes, lounge chairs, bar, grill, the food is prepped. I did all that while you've been gone. Next year, you get to play chaperone, huh? Don't tell me you haven't been looking forward to this. There will be a dozen teenagers in bikinis around you all afternoon. I'm willing to bet by the time I get home, you'll be all ready for me. Well, don't forget, one of those is our daughter, and 2 more of them are like surrogate daughters. I don't need to be around a dozen bikini-clad teenagers to be ready for you. I'm ready for you all the time, every day. I know you are, and I like that," he said. Joan, who worked for a mid-sized investment firm in a suburb of Nashville, Tennessee, responded to the question, "Did you have a good trip?" by saying, "We did. It was a good learning conference." After working there for close to 6 years, she was promoted to the position of senior investment advisor. Eva rolled her eyes at her father, however, she was happy that her parents still loved each other as much as they did. "That's great, sweetie. Have a safe trip back from San Jose." "Thanks, I'll see you later this afternoon." "Love you, Joan." "Love you, Pete." Eva rolled her eyes at her father. She wished that after 25 years of marriage, she would still feel the same level of love for her partner. He had been lover until the children were born, and then he was daddy until their oldest child went to college. Pete was also in his own mind for a brief moment, and he was thinking of himself as the teddy bear. Since then, he has had the role of her teddy bear. He didn't mind it too much, she most certainly enjoyed cuddling up next to him, and she told him that she enjoyed sleeping with and then next to her teddy bear, so who was he to complain about it? His daughter, along with her 2 closest friends, had been keeping themselves occupied for a couple of days in order to get everything ready for the party. She and her friends were only 2 weeks away from the beginning of their college classes, which were for the majority of them in their junior year. Before the majority of them began their journeys to other parts of the Southeast, Eva desired to throw a large party. Vanderbilt University, which is located approximately 20 miles north of her parents' home in Franklin, Tennessee, was where she was beginning her junior year of academic study in the field of medicine. In an apartment on campus, she shared her life with her closest friends for a very long time. She was a very cute girl and, like her mother, was about 5 feet 6 inches tall and curvy. Lily and Carrie, the best friends mentioned above, had spent the night together and had also been helping that morning. Lily was a tall, slender, and very attractive African American with very pretty light pecan brown colored skin and wonderfully long, curly hair. She was a good inch taller than Pete, which she teased mercilessly. Carrie was also a very attractive African American woman. Because he loved her and enjoyed being in her presence, he didn't mind at all. To Eva, she was similar to a sister, and to him, she was like another daughter. From the time they were in the 3rd grade, she and his daughter had been as close as thieves. She was able to attend Vanderbilt University thanks to a track and field scholarship, which covered a portion of her overall tuition costs. In addition to the mile, she ran the 800 meters and the 1500 meters. Pete would take her out for a few runs when she was younger, but as she got older, he informed her that he could no longer run with her because he was preventing her from reaching her full potential. It was too much for her to run with him. A young lady with a high level of intelligence, she was pursuing a degree in mathematics and computer science. When Eva first started attending elementary school, she made her first friend, Carrie, who is now considered to be her other best friend. Carrie had dropped the sandwich that their housekeeper had prepared for her, and Eva came to her rescue by giving her half of her own sandwich. Eva's parents had instilled in her the importance of helping others from a young age. They became their own version of the Three Musketeers when Lily came along because they were so close to being inseparable prior to her arrival. Carrie's SAT score was only 1330, but she was still able to get into Vanderbilt University thanks to the financial support of her parents and her old money connections. They made fun of her by commenting that she could have received a score of 600 and still been accepted into the program. As a prank in high school, rather than being voted most likely to succeed, or some other useless award, she was voted most likely to buy an island. She was a little blonde doll with a cute figure on her tiny 5 feet 2 inches frame. They were a good group, like three sisters, and Pete loved having the three of them there with him under the backyard pavilion and outdoor kitchen attached to the side of the 2-story pool house, all of which was mostly built by Pete over the years. They had the table ready to serve lunch, and the rest of their friends should be showing up any minute. It was a gorgeous August day, and the lounge chairs were set up, the pool was clean, and Pete had mowed and manicured the yard. Eva seemed to have inherited her mother's organizing and event planning abilities, and she had kept her father moving the last 2 days. She was his little girl, and she bragged on him when she had the chance. He tended to be more bashful than boastful and was very assured of his capabilities, but not braggadocious about them. She guessed building and running his small consulting firm would do that for some men. Not that what other men did mattered to her, she knew the fathers of most of the girls coming over, and if there were a vote amongst them as to who had the best dad, hers would likely get a majority of first-place votes. After helping serve a lavish spread of food and non-alcoholic drinks, Pete said, "Okay, ladies, I'm going back inside." Lily asked, "Are you sure you don't want to stay out here and eat with us? Let me know if there is anything you require." "Thank you very much, Lily. I hope that each and every one of you takes pleasure in this. I am doing well." This afternoon was for the girls only. He had kept himself busy in his office, out of which he could see the pavilion and a portion of the pool. Once the girls had started taking off their cover-ups and clothes to reveal their swimsuits, he moved around to the den to watch the Braves lose another game because he didn't want to appear to be a creeper. He had been watching for about 20 minutes when he heard a commotion out by the pool. Standing to investigate, he saw a large young man grabbing Carrie's wrist and trying to pull her away from her friends, who had surrounded the two of them and were yelling for him to stop. Pete ran outside, and as he got closer to the group, he yelled, "Hey, you jerk, that woman should be allowed to go." The big guy, who was probably not more than 6 feet 3 inches tall, saw Pete and smirked. He did not even bother to slow down as he dragged Carrie, who was resisting, towards the exit. Despite the fact that he was probably twice as heavy as she was, little Carrie didn't even weigh 115 pounds. Lily was pushed out of the way by the a-hole as Pete got closer. As she stumbled, Pete attempted to catch her, but due to her tall frame, she collided with his nose with a great deal of force. For a brief moment, he was able to see stars, but he quickly recovered and ran in the direction of the gate that led to the driveway. He was trying to get between Carrie and the intruder. It was Carrie who yelled out, "Let me go, Ricky!" All of the other girls moved away from the 3 individuals who were involved in the altercation, but they did not go very far. "Girls, get back," and called out to them. Some of them were filming with their phones out. Pete yelled out something to the effect of, "I said, let her go, a-hole." Pete stepped in close to Ricky, who made the decision that the fact that Pete was 6 inches tall and 60 or 70 pounds heavier than him meant that he didn't have to worry about him very much. In spite of the fact that his right hand was holding Carrie's wrist, he attempted to poke Pete with his left hand. That turned out to be his first error. After making a low dodge, Pete landed a powerful punch on Ricky's solar plexus, then used the momentum he had gained for himself. After a loud whoosh of air rushed out of his mouth, he hunched back, absorbing the blow, and releasing Carrie from his grasp simultaneously. Pete did not waste any time and delivered a powerful knee to Ricky's groin, which caused him to lose his balance and fall to his hands and knees. Ricky slowly got to his feet and said, "You aren't as big as my old man said you were. I'm going to enjoy slapping you around." He then proceeded to say, "Get the hell out of my backyard, a-hole." It was telegraphed so far in advance that Pete had to wait before he could respond to the big guy's attempt to take another swing at him, even though the big guy was getting ready to do so. It was obvious that this individual had not received any training. As Pete ducked under the big roundhouse right hook, he put his right foot behind A-hole's right leg and shoved as hard as he could. Thankfully, this allowed him to avoid being hit by the hook. Ricky had already lost his equilibrium as a result of the missed swing, and he fell backwards over Pete's leg, landing with a loud thud on his back. When Pete said, "Just leave. I don't want to have to hurt you," several of the young ladies giggled at the shorter man threatening the outmatched giant. Those giggles weren't helping. As Ricky climbed to his feet, he said, "You move pretty good for a teddy bear, but my dad calls you a little teddy bear." Pete was wondering where he got his information, how he knew about. Ricky came for him again, but now Pete was getting pissed. He knew he needed to end this before he lost his temper and control. Ricky tried to fake a right jab but did it poorly. When he threw a left jab, Pete dodged it. What Pete was waiting for was what came next, another right hook that seemed to start down in Birmingham and slowly whizzed by Pete's head. As Ricky's arm went past Pete's head, he stepped in and delivered a devastating combination to A-hole's right side where his kidney and liver are located. Pete thought that was probably the hardest he had ever hit anyone with his hands. Ricky dropped like a stone. It took a solid 45 seconds just to get to his hands and knees. Nobody was giggling anymore. As he pushed himself onto his knees and prepared to stand, Pete grabbed one of A-hole's hands, bent it behind his back, and put enough pressure on his fingers to almost break them. Once on his feet, Pete marche. After Pete let him go, Ricky was moving like an old crippled man, holding his side. Ricky had enough fighting, but he wasn't done talking. "You may call your wife your sweetie, but my dad calls her his sweet kitty." Surprised, "Oh, just because she tells you she's traveling doesn't mean she is. Sometimes they stay in town so she can enjoy his big tool uninterrupted for a couple of days, close to home." Pete said, "You're right. If you want to continue to talk trash about my wife, we can go back into the backyard and continue our conversation. Don't stop yapping, you dolt. In any case, even if you claim to have evidence, I would not fall for your claims. With your embarrassment, the only thing you have left to offer is lies. Oh, we'll have to wait and see about that. I'll believe it when I see it in my hand," and Pete pointed to his hand. "Even then, you'll probably have someone fake it." Ricky just smirked at Pete, looking around. Ricky found Carrie's Mercedes and banged the hood of her SUV hard enough with his fists to dent it. It was then that Pete finally noticed the sounds from all the other girls yelling and gesturing at the young man. He had been so focused a few moments ago that he didn't hear them. Ricky slumped into his BMW and left. The moment Pete turned around, he saw a number of young women making very unladylike gestures toward Ricky, as well as a number of cell phones filming the activities. Pete then said, "Come on, ladies, the show is over. Come back inside. Moreover, I ask that you refrain from showing that video to anyone just yet. First things first, let's have a brief conversation about it, all right?" He heard Eva say, "Daddy, your nose is bleeding." In the next instant, Lily was barking orders to everyone to make room for Pete on a chaise lounge chair under one of the umbrellas. "Eva, go get him a clean shirt," Lily said. "He is bleeding from his nose." "I need you to go get him a bag of ice," she instructed Carrie. She got him sitting down and began pulling his shirt off to hold against his nose. The remaining 10 girls all got a really good look at this very fit and lean man in his late 40s. They never would have expected what they just witnessed. At that moment, Pete had nearly a dozen bikini-clad nurses ever so willing to help him. Though with Lily running things, that was unlikely to happen. One of them ran to the pavilion to get him something to drink, another was trying to ease him back so that he could lie down, and the rest were chattering away about what happened and staring at Pete. Upon the return of Carrie and Eva, he placed the ice on his nose and inquired, "Who the hell was that a-hole?" "Why would someone raise a piece of like that?" Eva stepped in to answer the first 2 questions. "That a-hole, as you like to call him, is Ricky Farmington, the son of Andrew Farmington, Mom's boss." "Carrie, what did he want with you?" Eva asked. "According to Carrie, the reason he was after me was because we went out once a couple of weeks ago, and when he asked me out again, I declined. He didn't want to let Eva or the others know that he was concerned about the situation. Oh, those earlier accusations just went from some stupid kid talking smack to maybe a stupid kid that knows something, he said. He wasn't very nice about it, despite the fact that I tried to do it in a nice way. I am sorry that he came this way. I'm not sure how he found me, but I'm guessing one of the crew here put today's party on social media. She looked at her friends and pleaded with them, please stop doing that. Before turning her attention back to Pete, she asked, Mister, do you know what caused the bleeding in your nose, Clark? You were never touched by him. Pete remarked, I believe that was from the time when I was attempting to capture my other daughter, Lily. He smiled at Lily and said, I'm so sorry, Dad. Lily had been calling him Dad for a number of years. When he pushed me, you were so close, and when you tried to catch me, we got tangled up. She collided with me, and the side of her head hit my nose. When Pete squeezed her hand, he said, don't worry, it wasn't your fault. I didn't mean to bump your nose. It doesn't feel broken, just sore, he said, pleased to hear that, worried about the videos. Pete said, I know this is asking a lot of all of you, but please don't share a video of what happened with anyone outside of this group. Pete was concerned about the videos. Please refrain from posting anything on social media, sending any emails, or texting any of your friends. Thank you. Who is it, Daddy? There was nothing wrong with you at all. Eva, who was curious about the situation, said, from the looks of things, you could have really hurt him if you wanted to. He responded by saying, in the first place, I don't want any of those smears regarding your mother being posted out there. Even though we are aware that they are not true, they would still not be a good sound. It is also possible that someone with that kind of temper could try to exact revenge on Carrie, myself, or any of us if that video were to be uploaded to the internet or started making its way around. Is it not clear to you? It would be embarrassing for him, and he would want some revenge. I would hate for one of you to be leaving a movie theater or college class at night and for him to sneak up behind you and hurt you because he was angry and stupid or drunk. He still might, but I would hate it even more if he did. Certainly, he would be taken into custody at a later time. However, with a temper like that, he could be dangerous and cause some damage that is irreversible. Eva inquired, are you going to make a call to the authorities? I'm afraid that's the case. As a couple of girls giggled at Ricky's attempt to assault the smaller man, they said, he also damaged the hood of Carrie's SUV, not to mention trespassing and I'm sure other things. Although we do not have to make a decision about whether or not to press charges at this time, he assaulted Carrie and Lily and attempted to assault me. I'll put in a request to have someone come out and take our statements. It shouldn't take too much time. Please forgive me, but we have to get this done. He inquired, Carrie, is your wrist okay? You can still have your party by the pool and lay out on the beach. Yes, I firmly believe that. Pete gave a slight nod and said he grabbed it pretty hard, so it might bruise, but nothing else has happened. When Carrie inquired, Mister, can you tell me where you learned how to do that one? Although he is a big guy, Ricky is in good shape. I am aware that he has triumphed in a number of fights. In a way, it is rather dull. Are you certain that you want to listen to this? Pete shrugged and said, when I was in high school, I was teased occasionally about my height. There were a dozen women wearing bikinis who were nodding their heads up and down. It was a pretty cool sight to see. As a result of the fact that both of my parents are short, I was aware that this was not likely to change. The fact that I ran track when I was in junior high and then cross-country when I was in high school ensured that I was always in good shape. Even though I was competing in the state finals, I was pretty good as well. On the other hand, I was a junior at the time, and I went out on a date with a nice girl. As we were leaving the movie theater, a couple of big jerks like Ricky wanted to harass us. I tried to ignore them and make my way through the situation for a moment, but they continued to do so. Given that I was on a date, I did not want to initiate anything, so I allowed them to exert some pressure on me. To my good fortune, I was accompanied by a couple of friends who were also present. When they realized what was going on, they joined us, and the two jerks left our side. Our date came to an end, and I went back to my house. I was more than a little bit dissatisfied. Immediately after I informed my father about it, he went out of his way to locate a martial arts studio in the vicinity of their home in Knoxville. According to what he said to me, be the best you can be, but if you ever get good, don't go looking for trouble. Defense of you and others only. I made a commitment to him, and I continued to take 2 lessons every week until I went to Georgia Tech for my college education. A studio that taught a variety of other martial arts, such as Silat, a style of close combat, as well as Judo and Jiu-Jitsu, was one of the places I discovered while I was attending college in Atlanta. The primary focus of their training was on self-defense, and they did not adhere to any particular style. The 4 years that I spent in college were spent there. In his late 30s, the instructor was a really old man who was about the same height as me, and his daughter was about the same size as Eva she was. Together with his daughter, he was the headmaster of the school, and she was the most incredible fighter I've ever seen. She was quick, fearless, and destructive. During her training, I witnessed her competing against large, quick men who held black belts, and it was extremely uncommon for them to ever touch her. And when they did, they almost always regretted their decision to do so. For a period of 4 years, I took between 2 and 4 lessons per week because I was aware that I wanted to learn from her. During that time, I was doing pretty well. Indeed, he was being humble. When I married Joan, we continued to reside in Atlanta. However, I reduced the number of lessons I took each week to 1. Over the course of our entire marriage, she has never once witnessed me competing in a match. However, she is aware that I work out in the gym that is located in our basement. During the time that you were attending college a few years ago, Eva, I discovered a local studio and started studying back up again. Although I'm not as good as I used to be, I'm doing okay. Daddy, I couldn't have known, Eva said. Oh, sweet pea, you didn't have to do that. The trip to Paris that we took you and Donnie on when he was in the 9th grade and you were in the 7th grade is something that you remember. Do you remember that night when we drove out to that Moroccan restaurant in the shader-looking section of the city? She nodded. Do you remember that night? I told your mother that I didn't want to go there because I thought it wasn't a safe place to go at night. She gave another nod. I told her that I didn't want to go there. Obviously, she was not in agreement. As is my custom, I eventually gave in to the pressure, even though the conversation had become somewhat heated after a while. It was a remarkably good restaurant. I had a good time. On the other hand, do you recall what transpired while we were walking back to the car? Those 2 guys, a tall one and a short one, came up behind us and yelled at us to stop. Eva responded by saying, "Those guys came up behind us." You handed Mom the keys to the car, instructed her to drive us to the vehicle, started the vehicle, and started honking once we were inside, she said. That's right. During the time that the 3 of you were running away, I was making preparations to either stop them or slow them down if I wasn't there sooner. Even though I was aware that she would call the police, I couldn't help but wonder how long it would have taken for them to arrive in that particular area of the city. Following your departure, the tall individual pulled out a knife and uttered the word money. I seriously doubt that he spoke much English other than that. I pretended that I didn't want to get into any trouble by holding my hands up, but eventually, he got close enough that I had no choice but to confront him. He was placed in the middle of me and the shorter guy. I grabbed his knife from him and inserted it into the side of his knee in a relatively short amount of time. I am astonished that you guys were not able to hear the scream. I struck the short guy when he pulled his own knife, and his knife fell away from us as a result of my strike. In any case, the tall guy's screams piqued the interest of a number of their companions, and they immediately began to run in our direction. Around this time, I started running in the direction of the car, hoping that you 2 were already inside. When I was with the first 2 guys, I had a sense of control over the situation. However, when I had 6 or 7 more guys coming my way, I decided that discretion was the better part of valor. I decided that it was time for me to depart. I ran in the direction of the car, and as soon as I heard the horn, I made a complete and utter dash for it. Your mother had entered the street and was prepared to leave. She had pulled over. It was then that I jumped into the front seat and instructed her to smash it. That is the only other time I have ever encountered something similar to that before today, and that is because she and I are married since then. That was a little fib. What he didn't tell them was that one time, after Donnie and Eva were born just before they moved to Nashville, he and Joan were out dancing one night when they still lived in Atlanta, and one of her former boyfriends from college, Bobby Taylor, then an Atlanta Falcons football player, approached them. Joan didn't think anything about it, but when he asked Joan to dance and she accepted, Pete was fuming. They only danced a few minutes, but later, when Pete saw him go into the restroom, he followed. In the restroom, the jock, a wide receiver who was about the same height as Ricky, smirked at Pete and started making some comments about how he missed Joan and maybe they would dance a little more that evening. Pete wasn't in the mood. As the old flame was about to try and push Pete out of the way to leave the restroom, Pete put him on the floor hard. The big guy fell at an odd angle, landed on his arm, and broke his ulnar bone at the elbow, which ended his playing time for that season. The Falcons brought in a replacement who did so well that Bobby was later traded to another team. No charges were filed. Pete continued her conversation with Eve's friends, saying, "So, everyone, please do not send that video to anyone. By the end of the day, there should be exactly 13 copies, including me, and never more than that." They all promised Pete that they wouldn't send it to anyone, and he hoped that they meant it. "I know that this kind of dampens the mood, but you shouldn't let it. What a jackass he is." "Forget him," Lily said. "You mean he's an a-hole?" Pete smiled, and some of the girls laughed. He stood and returned inside to call the police. When the officer arrived, he was rewarded with all those lovely ladies in their swimsuits. They quickly covered up, and he asked them to explain what happened. He examined Carrie's wrist, seeing it was still red but no more injured than that. Pete's nose had stopped bleeding, and he had changed. Carrie's mom had come over because her dad wasn't back yet from a trip. The entire discussion only took 30 to 40 minutes. Once the police car pulled away, the party resumed. Carrie hugged her mom and watched her drive away. Also, Eva came up to Pete and asked, "Dad, would you mind if we stayed here until we go to Carrie's? We planned on going out dancing after dinner, but after this afternoon, we prefer to dance here tonight." "It's your house, Eva. You know I don't mind. I love having you here." She hugged her father and returned to her friends. Pete caught the last inning of the Braves game. They were losing, of course. While watching, he received a text from Joan. Plane was delayed. "We'll be home late." He sighed. That little seed of doubt was starting to bother him, and he hated that some of Ricky's words were too close to home. He needed his wife to get home so they could talk. Pete danced with a few more of Eva's friends, or more accurately, they were dancing with him. They tried to teach him the electric slide again, but he couldn't ever quite get it right, which amused everyone, including Pete. Around 10 p.m., they needed to get to Carr's, whose huge house had a ton of bedrooms. Pete received very nice hugs, kisses, and thank yous from all the young ladies as they left. Having had a little help, it didn't take much to clean up outside. As he was putting the last of the trash into the trash bins, he heard the garage door open. Joan was home. He walked out to help her with her bag, and she gave him a big hug and quick kiss on the lips. As he approached, she said, "I missed you, baby. How was the party?" "It was interesting. I'll tell you about that in a minute. They just left to go to Carr's for the night." "Oh, I thought they were going out dancing," he said. "They decided to dance here. I'm sure you didn't mind that, did you?" That irritated him a bit, but he replied, "No, Lily pulled me outside with her, and I danced with most of them before they left." "Well, I'll bet you're in quite the mood. If I weren't so wiped out from the cross-country flight and the delays, I'd be happy to take care of you." Pete wasn't really in the mood either. He said, "Let me get your bag inside, and I'll pour you a glass of wine. I have quite the story to tell you." She was curious regarding what had happened and followed him in. Once he returned to the living room, she was sipping her wine and watched him sit across from her rather than by her. "Oh, this must be serious," she snickered. Pete proceeded to describe what happened, including calling the police but leaving out the dialogue from Ricky. She was shocked that someone could be so brazen as to just barge into their backyard and accost Carrie. Then Pete revealed the name of the assailant. "His name is Ricky. Ricky Farmington. Andrew's Ricky. Shock then disbelief crossed Joan's face. No way. I cannot believe he would do that. There must be some mistake, Pete said. Clearly, Andrew forgot to teach him a few things then, he thought to himself, like manners, respect, how to fight, and when to keep his big trap shut. Joan thought for a second, wait a minute, Rick's huge. You mean to tell me that you took him out of the backyard like trash? She giggled for a moment, then she giggled some more, and then she started laughing. What, she said, you're making this up, right? My husband, all 165 pounds, have you beat up that tank? He looks like he's almost twice your size. Okay, what's the joke? Pete was not as amused, she could see his disappointed expression and said, oh, come on, Pete, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. But be realistic here. Pete stood and said, good night, Joan. Don't pout, sweetie. I don't mean that badly. How else could he take it? I'll be there as soon as I finish this glass. She was shocked when he replied, don't bother. While Joan went into the kitchen to put her glass in the sink, she called to him, but he didn't reply. When she got upstairs to their bedroom, he wasn't there, he was in a guest room. She asked, Pete, what are you doing in here? I missed you and was planning on snuggling with my teddy bear tonight. Teddy bear and now? He wondered about the origin of her using that pet name. Was it a term of endearment or derision? He could blow up over the use of the term right then, but he was emotionally exhausted and wanted a fresh mind to think things through in the morning. He said, well then, I guess we'll both be disappointed. Then he closed the door and locked it. After a few minutes of knocking and pleading, she finally left and went to their bedroom, confused at the turn of events. Her husband must be losing his mind, she thought. She considered texting her daughter to find out more, but it was late and she would see her in the morning. Besides, no way could her husband do what he said. It wasn't possible. The next morning, Pete knew she would sleep late after the long flight and being on West Coast time for a couple of days. He wondered if she even went on a trip, which irritated him because now he was questioning everything. He snuck into their bedroom and retrieved some clothes for running and later changed for his run and ate a small breakfast. When he heard her beginning to stir, he went for a long run, 7 miles, and just under 53 minutes later, he returned. When he walked in the door, Joan did not look happy. We need to talk. I don't think you gave me the whole story last night. He ignored her and went to the shower. She was following, but once in the bathroom, he locked the door behind him. She beat on the door, but he continued with his shower and shave. Once dressed and feeling refreshed, he prepared to face his wife. He went downstairs to go into his home office, she was already waiting for him. Andrew called me this morning. I'm not sure I got the entire story last night. Ricky had blood in his pee and had to go to the emergency room yesterday. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy, she said. Pete replied, why am I not surprised that the little a-hole is lying about the incident? He's probably embarrassed that your little teddy bear threw him out, as you said, like garbage. Andrew's very angry. Why did you do that? Why did you attack him? The reason I attacked that poor boy was because he was attacking Carrie. You know, the Carrie that we love like our own daughter and have for over a decade, the Carrie that we took with us, Eva, and Lily to Spain for 2 weeks to celebrate Eva and their high school graduation. That same Carrie was being dragged out of our backyard by that disrespectful piece of, and I put a stop to it. Are you saying that you believe their story and not your husband? Do you believe I sucker punched him? Joan said, I'm sorry, Pete. No way could you do that face to face. Pete wanted to throw in her face how in the hell did that stupid kid know the things he knew. Pete was furious that he had to let that slide for now because all he had was a bunch of hearsay from Ricky and not enough to accuse her of anything without her easily being able to sidestep the accusation. And if true, she would be more careful in the future. The whole situation stunk, but if the accusations were true, then they were finished. So you don't believe that I could do it face to face, man to man? No offense, honey. I love you like no one else, but he's huge, and you're in great shape, but you're no match for him. Remember Paris? You were running as fast as you could with that little guy chasing you, trying to get to the car before he caught you. That was after I took care of the big guy. He was never going to catch me, and I was running because Pete stopped. This was pointless. It was already clear what she thought of him regaling his hard-fought and won battles wouldn't do any good. He could see it was already a lost cause, likely in more ways than one. She continued, "Do you have any idea how difficult this is going to make life for me?" That surprised Pete. "Oh, excuse me. What was I supposed to do? Would you rather I have used a gun? I would like to know what you hit him with." "My hands," he replied. "I've seen you work out in our basement gym, you go after the bag pretty good, but I don't see how you could have hurt Ricky by just hitting him. How could you have gotten a clean shot unless you snuck up on him? Thanks for the faith, babe. It's confidence-inspiring, in case you didn't pick up on it, that was sarcasm." Exaggeratedly, she rolled her eyes and groaned, "Oh, come on. That's not helping. What do I tell Andrew?" "You tell him that he raised his piece of son to be an a-hole, apparently just like him, and that Ricky needs to apologize to Carrie and me." "I will not. Ricky told him what happened, and it sounds like he didn't do anything wrong." Pete shook his head. "You must be delusional if you believe him over your husband. Did Andrew give you drugs while you were traveling?" Joan's face flamed at that comment, and she was about to reply when they heard a vehicle drive up and honk the horn. Thankful for the reprieve, they stood to see who was there. It was a big Bentley, and out of the vehicle exited Eva, Lily, Carrie, and her dad Brian. All three of the girls ran up and hugged Pete and then Joan. A moment later, Brian came up and shook his hand. "Pete, I want to thank you for looking after Carrie. It means a lot to me that you would do what you did. She's everything to me. I'll be forever grateful." Pete shrugged his shoulders, uncomfortable with the praise. "You know we love Carrie, no way was I letting her leave with her. It wasn't going to happen. You would have done the same." Brian nodded his head, and Joan piped up, "Girls, would you please explain to me what happened? I'm getting conflicting versions of events from what Ricky told his dad and what Pete is telling me." Eva asked, "You're getting two different stories, and you don't believe Dad?" Well, not that exactly. That's not what I'm saying, I'd just like to hear it from someone else. It all sounds so, I don't know, preposterous." Pete shook his head and went back inside, he wouldn't be there long. While the girls described the whole scene to Joan, Pete was grabbing his laptop and an overnight bag. He was getting away before he said something that he couldn't take back. He needed time to determine what he was going to do next. When Pete walked back outside, Brian, Carrie, and Lily were gone, and Joan was stunned. How could her husband have done that? Seeing the shock on his wife's face told him how far he had fallen when combined with her focus on how all this affected her and her work, not him, his daughter, or Carrie, it spoke volumes. Pete asked, "So, what are we going to do about that a-hole? Someone needs to teach him some manners." Joan scoffed, "And you think you're going to be the one to do it?" Pete couldn't believe it. She just heard 3 people corroborate his story, and she still didn't think he was capable of handling that a-hole. She must think her husband some kind of a coward. She said, "He's probably pretty pissed." Pete smirked, thinking how Ricky was probably still pissing some blood. What she said next killed him. "I don't think you'd be so lucky next time." The look on Pete's face told her she had gone too far. She meant it and was just trying to protect her husband from getting hurt. How could he take on such a big, strong young man directly? She watched as his face morphed from one of complete shock to being filled with fury. "When did you lose all respect for me as a man, Joan? What, you didn't used to treat me this way? You used to have some faith in me. I see that's gone now. You're being ridiculous, my feelings for you haven't changed. I'm proud of you and everything we've done together. Well, call me skeptical. Did you know that I have several people from several Fortune 500 companies in my contacts app? These people call me and my company when they need help. That's how I make my living. My company may not make as much as Andrew's, but my people and I get a hell of a lot of respect within our industry. Apparently, a lot more respect than I get at home. These last couple of days have been very educational when it comes to what you think of me. What does that mean? Not for you to worry about. I've made a decision. If that piece of either one of him or his father isn't here tomorrow at 6 p.m. to apologize to me and Carrie, then Brian and I will call the police and press charges. He needs to pay for the hood of her SUV. Also, you can't be serious. I still have to work with Andrew. Well, maybe you can convince him that he should teach his son some manners and that he should respect others. Clearly, he hasn't learned that from his dad. But I'm sure you know that by now, since you have to spend so much time around him. Pete, this could hurt my job. Well, Joan, look at what this is doing to us. But it doesn't appear that you see it that way. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. or Brian and I are calling the police. I'm going out for a while. No, you aren't. We aren't finished talking about this. We are finished, and I need to get away from you. I'm going over to Brian's to discuss this. I'm not calling that a-hole's father, since he listens to you. You can tell him what his kid must do to avoid jail time. Clock's ticking, Pete. Come back here. He ignored her, walked into the garage, placed his bag into his car, and drove away with Joan standing there with her hands on her hips and an exasperated expression on her face. Pete had never done anything like that. While driving to Brian's, Pete decided that he needed to do some traveling for his business. What he feared was that based on his wife's reaction and hers and Ricky's comments, she had already succumbed to Andrew. Traveling would get him away from her and give him a little time to see exactly how involved she was with Andrew. At this point, he believed that stupid kid. Damn it, Joan. Brian and Pete talked and agreed upon 6 p.m. tomorrow, or they would call the police. Pete went to a local hotel and sat at the desk and worked with the Braves game playing in the background. Around 5 p.m., his phone rang. He had blocked Joan's phone and the home phone so he could have some peace. He wondered who it was. Eva? Hey, baby. Hey, Daddy, she said. I'm driving back to the apartment. Are you nearby? I'm at the residence inn near the mall, room 413. I'll be there in a few minutes. 10 minutes later, he heard a knock on the door. When he opened it, Eva hugged him fiercely. I don't understand, Daddy. Why doesn't she believe us? I'd say she doesn't think very highly of my ability to protect my family, Eva, he said. She should. I told her about Paris. Pete shrugged. Let me guess, she didn't believe you? Eva shook her head, and he could see a tear leak from her eye. I'm sorry, baby. Maybe great big Andrew convinced her that I don't quite measure up. I don't know. You don't believe what that a-hole said, do you? For the second time, what he wanted to say was that he thought the reason that Joan had lost all respect for him as a man was because she was likely screwing someone a lot bigger than he was. He wanted to tell his daughter that it appeared that her mother was a 304, but he didn't say that. He said, no, he was just talking smack. Pete hated lying to his daughter, but he didn't want her thinking those things about her mother. It may turn out that they are true, and while things didn't look good, it was just speculation for the moment. Don't worry, sweetie. Everything is going to be fine. You think, she replied. I want to believe you, Daddy, but I'm worried. Don't be. We'll be okay. She wondered if he meant her and him or their family. A few minutes later, she left. School would begin in a couple of weeks, and she had her summer internship at the University Medical Center that had a few more days left. The next day, he checked his home security app on his phone to see when the garage doors opened and closed, signaling when Joan had left for work. The good thing about running your own small consulting company was that when you weren't traveling, you could work from your home office. The bad thing about that was when you were having a fight with your wife, you couldn't escape to the office. Finally, at lunchtime, He checked his messages. He had 20 texts from his wife, some of them quite long. Most of them were about his being unreasonable. The last one said, "You." When he checked his voicemail, he skipped all of them, which he would later delete, but listened to the last one. "Pete, Andrew said that Ricky would be there a couple of minutes before 6 tonight to apologize. I'm still not happy with you for putting me in this situation. We can talk about that after everyone leaves." Pete rolled his eyes. It was still somehow his fault. He was supposed to drive up to Louisville, Kentucky, to lead an operations planning whiteboarding session for one of his clients all day Thursday and Friday morning. He decided that he would drive there tonight after the apology and arrive a couple of days early. He would absorb one hotel night himself and do some pro work with the client in person on Wednesday. At 5:45 p.m., Brian and Har arrived. She gave Pete a big hug, and Brian shook his hand and said, "Well, this should be interesting. Are you and Joan okay? It sounded like this is putting you in a bad spot." "Nothing to worry about. We will be." "She's trying to wrap her head around her little husband beating up great big Ricky," Brian said. "I'll admit that I'm a little surprised too, not so much that you did it, but how convincingly you did it. I guess I shouldn't have been. You've always seemed very prepared in everything you do." "Thanks, Brian. Hopefully, Joan will remember that as well. If you don't mind, we'll wait out here because I don't want that piece of in my house." "I wouldn't either." A couple of minutes before 6 p.m., a BMW pulled into their driveway. When Ricky got out, he was not wearing a happy face. Joan still hadn't arrived. He approached the three of them standing there and said, "Carrie, I'm sorry about Saturday. I was out of line. I miss you and wanted us to go out again. I took your rejection poorly. I know we won't be going out anymore, but I hope I haven't destroyed our friendship. I'm sorry." He seemed somewhat contrite, but cynically Pete thought he was probably just looking for a way to get into her pants one day. Carrie said, "I don't know if we'll ever be friends again, Ricky, but I'll try to be polite and at least friendly. That's the best I can do right now." "I understand," Ricky said. Ricky turned to Brian. "Mr. Williamson, I'm sorry about what I did to Carrie and her SUV. Just send us the bill, and we'll take care of it." The word "I'm sorry" may have come out of his mouth, but he didn't seem very sorry. Brian just nodded. When Ricky looked at Pete, the contriteness was gone. "Mr. Clark, I apologize for interrupting the party and barging onto your property. I shouldn't have done that." "Okay, Ricky. Thank you. I think we're done here." Before Ricky turned to walk back to his car, he had a smirk on his face that they all could see. When he reached the car door, he looked at Pete and mouthed the word "Kitty." Pete opened his hand and pointed to it like he did Saturday, meaning he believed him. When he saw the evidence, Ricky grinned and got in his car. Brian said, "Well, his apology to Carrie seems sincere, but ours not so much. What did he say to you before he drove off?" Pete shook his head. "Nothing important. We had a discussion as he was leaving the other day. He was bringing it up to try and provoke me again." Carrie wanted to say something, but she felt terrible that she had ever agreed to go out with him in the first place. "Talk about a poor decision," Brian said. "Well, if you need any help with him, just let me know. I can have a team of lawyers on him and his father with one phone call. I might even find a deputy or two that could shadow him for a couple of weekends. That could prove entertaining," he smiled at the thought. "Thanks, Brian. Let's hold off on that for now. I've got a few other problems I need to resolve first." Brian nodded. After dropping Eva at home yesterday, Carrie told her parents all the nasty things that Ricky had said about Joan. They had known Joan for years. None of them thought he was telling the truth, at least they hoped so. Brian and Pete shook hands, Carrie gave him a goodbye hug, and they drove away. Pete opened the garage and drove off after they left. As he was pulling out of his driveway, Joan's car was approaching. Pete didn't even bother to wave as he pointed his car north towards Louisville. He would use the time to figure out what he was going to do regarding getting some evidence one way or another. What he needed most of all was to get away. He was still furious with his wife for the disrespect, and with Ricky's accusations on top, he knew he wouldn't be able to keep from saying something he might regret. He would use the time away to calm himself and prepare. 10 minutes later, his phone was ringing. He considered not answering, but decided there wasn't much left to lose except the aggravation. Maybe he could placate her enough that she would leave him alone while he was gone. "Hello, Joan." "Pete, I hope you were only going to the store and coming right back." "No, my client needed me to come to Louisville a couple of days early. I'll be there until after I have lunch with him on Friday. I should be home in time to eat dinner with you after that." Then he decided to get in a little dig. "Well, that assumes you won't be traveling with Andrew this weekend." She was surprised by the comment. "What?" "No, you know I only travel every 6 to 8 weeks. "Why would you say that?" "It's nothing. Had you been there on Saturday, you would have seen the whole thing. I'm still a little upset over your taking Ricky's side. I know you are, and I'm sorry. Andrew isn't very happy either, but that is understood." "Did Ricky show up and apologize?" Pete said he gave what seemed like a sincere apology to Carrie, but I suspect that was because he still wants to try to have sex with her someday. "He told Brian and me he was sorry, but that was the most disingenuous apology I've ever received. You and Andrew should be happy that he's not going to jail. He's just a kid, Pete. He's a 20-year-old young man that needs to get his anger under control and learn to respect others." Joan let out an audible sigh. "I want to talk to you about all this tonight. Can we talk when you get home on Friday?" "Sure, I'll miss you, Pete." Pete thought that she wouldn't have a good week. Joan then hung up the phone. Joan was surprised at how he ended their conversation. This whole thing was upsetting her sweet husband, while she still thought he wasn't very understanding regarding how the whole situation impacted her work. She knew this would just be a bump in their long road together. On Friday, she'd prepare something nice for him to eat and plan to give him a nice night in the bedroom as well, then this would all blow over. It was just over 3 hours to Louisville, plenty of time to think about what he needed to do. He was pretty sure that the brat Ricky knew too much for it to just be idle gossip. It didn't say very much about his father that he would share that kind of info with his son, but if Andrew was the kind of man that slept with married women, the fact that he isn't the greatest father wouldn't come as too much of a surprise either. The only thing he truly suspected was that Joan and Andrew screwed while away on trips. Of course, they could be having sex in town, as Ricky said Andrew was divorced, so they wouldn't even need hotels. Damn. However, he suspected that Ricky would be looking for proof to rub Pete's nose in it. He could try to fabricate something, but Pete would be on the lookout for that. What Pete planned to do was to travel as much as he could for the next several weeks. If she was a cheater and he was out of town, then the two of them might get careless and do it at their house. Andrew seemed like just enough of an a-hole to want to try that, and Joan seemed beholden enough to Andrew that she might allow it. Or maybe Pete should just hire a PI and have them followed. Sigh. He couldn't believe it had come to this, but Joan's disrespect of him was unexpected. He wondered how long he had been blinded by his love for his wife. As soon as he checked into his hotel, he went to Amazon, opened a new account, and ordered several different hidden Wi-Fi cameras. He planned to place them in his house. They would be delivered on Thursday to his hotel. Hopefully, they would never record anything, but he wasn't liking the odds on that. It was a long week for everyone. Eva called her dad a couple of times, and he told her he was fine. Donnie even called once to check on him, and Pete told him the same thing, everything was okay. Joan left text and voice messages telling him that she loved him and missed him. They were conveniently left during the times when Pete was with his clients. He was glad of that because he didn't want to talk to Joan. On Friday, he made the 3.5-hour drive home dreading what might be waiting for him, but it went better than expected. When he arrived, Joan was dressed nicely in a flattering dress that hit just above her knees. She was wearing high heels and nice jewelry, which Pete suspected meant that she wanted to go out to eat. In her heels, she was as tall as him, which never bothered him at all. He always loved having her on his arm. That night, he was fine with their going out because it would keep her in a good mood and likely prevent any conversation from wandering towards anything serious until they got home. He changed quickly, and she asked him to drive them to a swanky steakhouse that she knew he liked. Like the evening where they would go to performances, she was on his arm all night. She eased off one of her shoes and rubbed his leg under the table. He hated that she could have this effect on him when he was still aggravated. He wondered how many more nights there would be like this, praying that he was wrong but fearing that what he suspected was true. Once at home, as soon as they walked through the door, she was all over him. They didn't make it past the family room before she had removed her dress and thong and was working on his zipper. Standing there in her vers and heels had the desired effect on him, and Joan didn't mind one bit when he pulled her up, spun her around, and screwed her while she was bent over the couch. She pulled him up the stairs towards the bedroom and did it again. That was wonderful, I needed that. I love you, Pete, she said. He hugged his wife and replied, I love you too, Joan. She missed the verb tense. After she had lain on him for a few more minutes, she went to the restroom to prepare for bed. Upon returning to the bedroom, she spooned back into her husband, pulled his arm around herself, and blissfully went to sleep, believing all was right with the world. The following morning found Joan already awake and drawing circles on her husband's chest. Once she could tell he was good and awake, she said, Thank you for last night, it was a good night. He had to admit it was rather nice. My pleasure, sweetie. The word sweetie caused him to remember what Ricky had said. Joan said, I do need to tell you something, but I hope you won't get too upset. I need to go to Memphis to meet with one of our university clients on Thursday. They want a complete review of their portfolio. I should be back on Friday. Oh, how did this happen? Don't these get scheduled a little further out in advance? He replied. Normally they do, but a competitor has been talking to them, and they are one of my top clients, so Andrew wants me to go talk some sense to them. Oh, so you were going alone this time? I am. They've been with me a long time, so it should be okay, she said. He was quietly thinking for a minute. She asked him, Are you okay? He said, Yeah, I'm in a similar situation. I have to travel next weekend and all the following week. General Dynamics VP of Supply Chain over their Gulfstream division wants me to attend a supply chain conference with him in Orlando, then I'll be with him at their Savannah factory the rest of the week. She sat up at that revelation, causing herself to become uncovered, which looked amazing as her jugs were still jiggling. Once she was sitting, not caring much about anything else anymore, Pete reacted by pulling her to him so he could begin to kiss. Pete had always loved her figure because she still was and always had been very curvy with full jugs and bummed a match. Joan wanted to know more about what was an unusual trip for him. Slow morning sex followed by a good shower had been rare for them over the last several years, and they both enjoyed it immensely. She hated that they didn't do it more often, but she knew that was partially her fault. Pete hated feeling like it was all about to come to a painful end. Sitting over breakfast, she didn't want to ask, but she did anyway, Pete, we didn't talk about last weekend. Are we okay? I hope you know how much I love you. We need to find a way past this because I have long-term plans for you and for us. He smiled at her and squeezed her hand. I'd like that too, Joan, though he didn't think it was going to happen. He had to give her credit, she tried all weekend and early the following week to love him, not only with sex but as much as she had in many, many years. He did his best to reciprocate, but he honestly felt like the end was quickly coming. Over the weekend, he installed a small GPS tracker on her car to map out where she went. He took all the Amazon shipments that had been hiding in the trunk of his car and put them into place. He replaced smoke detectors, books on bookshelves, and wall receptacles with devices containing hidden Wi-Fi cameras and microphones. He added a couple of outdoor cameras to his security system. His house was now completely covered for video and sound, and rather than feeling prepared, he felt terrible. On Thursday morning, Joan kissed him goodbye, and he asked, Will you drive your car to Memphis or grab a rental? I'll take mine. Don't worry, The company will reimburse the mileage, and I'll be safe driving my car. Okay, be careful. I will, baby. Love you. Love you too. It didn't take long to get confirmation of what he feared. A few hours later, when she should have been either at their Brentwood office or on I-40 driving to Memphis, the GPS on her car was showing at Andrew's house. His marriage was officially over. Pete needed to burn off some steam, so he went to his dojo to spar with whoever was there and then work out. He wanted to stay sharp because if he ever got the chance, he'd make Andrew pay physically. So much for self-defense only. Thanks again, Joan. Joan did him the courtesy of texting him later in the day, saying she had made it safely to Memphis. The GPS still showed her car at Andrew's house. He prepared for his fake trip to Orlando and decided he would call tomorrow to find a PI to tail his wife. He didn't need to bother. Early Friday morning, an email was delivered to his business email address with the subject for the kitty bear. In the message, it said, "I found your email on your website. I've been working on my dad, and he told me that before long, I'll be screwing her too." Included was a link to a cloud account that included hours and hours of video from several cameras in Andrew's home. It seemed to be recently set up and was recording the events live as they happened. He watched the first recorded stream and saw Joan and Andrew walking into the house. Andrew began undressing her in the family room. Unlike Pete the previous Friday night, Andrew had Joan bent over his couch, screwing her. Pete had seen enough.